Greetings to you all. This is the overview video that concludes Model 3 on the building blocks of federalism and decentralization. As an interdisciplinary course on federalism and decentralization, we try to ensure that all relevant scholarly angles are pursued in order to bring a sense of order to what otherwise looks like impenetrable complexity. After all, what we see is going to be influenced from where we look. And as we had concluded in the last video lecture, none of these academic disciplines on their own can provide a comprehensive and coherent picture that captures all aspects of federalism and decentralization. And since their starting points of analysis rest on different intellectual foundations, and since different scholarly disciplines have different goals and different aspirations, the insights and findings do not seamlessly come together at the end. Nevertheless, it is imperative that we employ these different perspectives in order to reach the closest holistic approximation of the workings of federalism and decentralization. Now let's look back at Model 3's video lectures in light of this perspective. In Model 3, we looked at the building blocks of federalism along different scholarly angles. This is the last thematic module we cover before jumping into the case studies in the next modules. So it is important for us to look back and take stock. Video Lecture 1 examined the legal foundations. Federalism studies has its origins in the study of constitutional law, and to this day, especially in Africa, a number of legal scholars have been involved in the design and the implementation of federalism and decentralization. The legal angle remains an important approach in the study of federalism in the West too. In very basic terms, in Video Lecture 1, we looked at the Constitution, at courts, and a Bill of Rights. How constitutions distribute authority rests at the core of who does what. That is the basis for federalism and decentralization. Without the legal foundations, we would not know where to start. In fact, we would probably have no topic to discuss at all, as institutional constitutional measures introducing the corporate recognition of regional states, the collective representation of communities, and across-the-board territorial devolution, what is in the law is always the first step in the analysis, but it might not always be the final word. We would need the political and social context to understand not the institutional aspects of formal design, but to understand how formal institutions, constitutions really work. Politics and society are the factors that determine the day-to-day workings of federalism and decentralization, as well as their long-term historical trajectory. Video Lecture 2, on the other hand, examined the political foundations. Political approaches have become more widespread internationally in the last few decades. In political science, the emphasis tends to be a little more comparative than the legal approaches we looked at in Video Lecture 1. And particularly in the study of Western federations, contemporary political science works are more likely to adopt a variable-based approach and more focused on narrow research questions. That is, one zooms in on one important explanatory variable, say the number of votes regional states have in the upper house of parliament, and then adopts a cross-country comparative research design in order to explore this aspect of federalism only, with an eye to seeking explanations that are generalizable across cases. For example, one examines a hypothesized causal relationship between a number of regional states in a federation and political stability. In order to do this, focus is limited to this binary causal relationship between what is known as the dependent and independent variables. That is, what is explained and the explanation, in other words. One examines this hypothesized causal relationship across a number of case studies of federal states to see if the relationship holds. The political foundations of federalism and decentralization can cover various issues that are not strictly of legal nature. The representation of the regional states at the center was one of the key issues we examined in Video Lecture 2. But also important is the type of political parties and the political system. Do we see nationwide parties cutting across regional state jurisdictions and campaigning nationally? Or do we see political parties that are only active at the regional level, or indeed only active within one regional state? Are there multiple parties competing for the control of various orders of government, or is this a case where we see one nationally dominant party controlling most orders of government? Altogether, political factors we look at play an important role in the foundations of federalism. These political factors are often uncodified and malleable to change over time. Now, this does not make them less relevant, of course. We might be able to say exactly the same thing about the important but uncodified societal foundations of federalism and decentralization. Video Lecture 3 adopted this scholarly perspective that has so far remained a minority view in comparative federalism. That is, a more society-centered, sociological perspective that looks at uncodified factors that might not initially appear to be directly related to politics. Various social cleavages in a country, be it economic, ethnic, linguistic, religious, cultural, are indeed important uncodified factors that influence the workings of federalism and decentralization. Society-based approaches do not come in neat technical and legal categories. They are not open to easy operationalization. These are not factors formally codified in legislation, enshrined in constitutions, proposed in reforms. These are large-scale, macro, structural characteristics that are likely to evolve gradually over time. While remaining out of federal design in formal terms, they nonetheless play a central role in determining how things work in practice. The fact that they are hard to identify and operationalize should not mean that we should exclude these society-based analyses from our investigation. Now, I want to leave you with a little joke on this matter. You've probably heard this one before, but it does have some relevance to what we're discussing here. There was a drunk on his knees looking for something under streetlights one night. And people passing by ask him, "Hey, what is going on? Have you lost something? Are you looking for something?" And the drunk looks up and replies that indeed he is looking for his car keys under the streetlight. People then ask, "Oh, so you dropped them right here under the street lamp?" And he says, No. I dropped them back in that dark alley. But the light is much better here," he says. So the next time we'll be looking at our case studies, and we'll make sure to put the spotlight on the well-lit as well as the dark corners in order to find the key that unlocks federalism and decentralization. I'll see you then.